The book of Daniel was written about 600 years before the time of Christ. The entire book was written by Daniel the prophet himself except for chapter 4, which was written by King Nebuchadnezzar. The name Daniel comes from a juxtaposition of two words, Elohim, meaning God, and Dan, meaning judge. The name Daniel means God is judge. The story of Daniel began in a tragedy. God's people have been disobedient to God's law, and since they were stubborn and disobeyed, God had to send them adversity. The nation of Babylon came to destroy Jerusalem and carry away some of their finest and best young people into Babylon, where they were trained in the customs, societies, government, and culture of the Babylonians. Daniel was one of those who were trained to be among the wise men or magicians in Babylon. Now in Daniel 2, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had a dream that disturbed him from his sleep, and he had a sense that the dream was important, but he forgot what the dream was about. So he called the Chaldeans. These were some of the wise men of Babylon, and asked them to tell him what the dream was and its interpretation. The king was asking them to read his mind. This was impossible. But remember, he pays these wise men to know things that normal people wouldn't know. So he expected them to know the dream and its interpretation. The king was furious to have learned that these wise men could not do what they said they could do. And so he ordered the death of all the wise men in the courts of Babylon. Daniel was one of those to be put to death. When it came time for Daniel to be killed, he asked why the decree was so urgent. One of the king's guards, Arioch, made it known to Daniel the reason why. And so Daniel petitioned for time so that he and his Israelite friends could pray about the dream. In verse 19 of Daniel 2, the Bible says that God gave Daniel the dream in a night vision. So Daniel boldly met with the king to tell him what the dream was, and that most importantly, there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets and alone can interpret the dream. And the dream was this. King Nebuchadnezzar saw a giant statue with the head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet and toes, partly of iron and partly of potter's clay. Then a stone was cut out without hands and struck the statue on its feet and crushed the whole statue completely. And then that stone became a great mountain that filled the whole earth. So with the help of God, Daniel declares to the king what his dream was and tells the king the interpretation. Now you can find Christian books out there that will tell you that this statue is the European Union or the United Nations, but what did the Bible actually say? Starting in verse 37 of Daniel 2, Daniel reminds the king how glorious his kingdom was, and then he says, "You are this head of gold." The head of gold is King Nebuchadnezzar and the kingdom of Babylon. Then Daniel says that after the kingdom of Babylon, a kingdom of silver shall arise, and then after that a third kingdom of bronze shall rule the world, and then a fourth kingdom of iron shall shatter them all, and that fourth kingdom shall be divided. So what Daniel was trying to say is that this great big statue was a timeline, and each metal represented a kingdom. Daniel says that Babylon was this head of gold, and that those other metals after gold represent the soon coming world ruling empires that will conquer after Babylon. Who then was the chest and arms of silver? Well, who conquered Babylon? Despite Nebuchadnezzar's desires and ambitions, Babylon did not continue forever. It was eventually conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire led by Cyrus the Great, who ruled from 539 BC to 331 BC. Medo-Persia was this chest and arms of silver. Who conquered Medo-Persia? It was of course the Macedonian Alexander the Great, who led the kingdom of Greece, which ruled the world from 331 BC to 168 BC. Alexander was one of the greatest military minds of all time, and an interesting fact, Greek weapons were made out of bronze. Greece was this belly and thighs of bronze. Who conquered Greece? On June 22nd, 168 BC, at the Battle of Pydna, the empire of Alexander the Great, 144 years after his death, perished under the iron monarchy of Rome. In verse 40 of Daniel 2, Daniel says that this fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron can break and shatter everything in pieces. Iron can crush gold, silver, and bronze. Rome was the greatest empire of antiquity. Jesus Christ was nailed to a Roman cross in 31 AD. Jerusalem was sacked by the Roman army in 70 AD. The legs of iron was Rome. Who conquered Rome? Verse 41 of Daniel 2 says that this fourth kingdom will not be conquered as much as it shall be divided. We now know that the fourth kingdom was Rome. If we go down history and find that Rome was indeed divided and not conquered, then we cannot deny the truth that this book that declared it from the past is a supernatural book. So was Rome conquered or was Rome divided? Rome was, in fact, not conquered from without, but was divided from within. By 285 AD, the Roman Empire had grown so vast that it was no longer feasible to govern all the provinces from the central seat of Rome. The Emperor Diocletian divided the empire in half, with the Eastern Empire governed out of Byzantium, later known as Constantinople, and the Western Empire governed from Rome. Not only was Rome divided in half, but from 351 AD to 476 AD, Rome was picked apart and divided even more by 10 barbarian tribes, which became 10 countries in Europe. Divided Rome is the feat partly of iron and partly of potter's clay. Now, I thought it was interesting that Rome was divided into 10 countries at the feet era of this prophecy. Is it a coincidence that feet have 10 toes? Very, very interesting. Who are these 10 tribes? The Alemanni today are the Germans. The Burgundians are the Swiss. The Franks are the French. The Lombards are now the Italians. The Saxons became the English. The Suevi today are the Portuguese. The Visigoths are now the Spanish. The Heruli, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals are now extinct, which was later prophesied by Daniel in chapter 7. All of these barbarian tribes today form divided Rome, or what we now call Europe. This is the feet and toes partly of iron and partly of potter's clay. Now verse 43 of Daniel 2 says that divided Rome will try to adhere or unite to one another, but will not be successful, just as iron does not mix with clay. Have there been efforts to unite Europe? There have been at least 5 who tried to outsmart God's prophecy. Charlemagne tried to recreate the Holy Roman Empire. He was unsuccessful. Charles V of Spain was unsuccessful. Louis XIV of France was unsuccessful. Napoleon Bonaparte was unsuccessful. And Adolf Hitler was unsuccessful. We cannot stop prophecy. When God declares it, it is permanent. So now we know the head of gold was Babylon, the chest and arms of silver was Medo-Persia, the belly and thighs of bronze was Greece, the legs of iron was Rome, and the feet and 10 toes of iron and clay was divided Rome, which we now call Europe. The Mark of the Beast. What is it all about? Now, this subject is probably one of the most debated when it comes to end-time events. Is it a microchip or a tattoo that people are forced to wear in their foreheads or right hand? It's much like hunting for an animal's footprint. How would you know what footprint we're looking for if we do not specify which animal it is from. It is the beast's mark. They will also have the name of the beast and the number of his name. And what number is that? That number is 666. Now it's time for us to really dig deep and figure out what is the papacy's mark of authority.